And we now turn to Collegeville, Minnesota. David Calabro, who is the curator of Eastern Christian manuscripts at the Hill Museum and the Manuscript Library. And he's going to talk to us about digital etymology basic principles. So David, over to you, please.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And thanks to Jean for organizing this conference. And can you all see the PowerPoint, the presentation there?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. Okay, and now you can see a new image.
Yes.
So it is advancing. I know there have been some troubles with that so far. Okay. So this paper is about what some might view as the front end of the tail end. That is, it is about the user's experience, the front end, of something that comes at the end of the process of manuscript digitization and the creation of encoding of text corpora, the focus of this conference. After manuscripts have been digitized and their words rendered into a digital form, those words need to be tagged so they can be used in text-critical, cultural, historical, grammatical, and lexicographic applications. Digital text corpora are particularly suited to a trend in lexicography that focuses on context. Etymology, according to this trend, is essentially an afterthought. Essentially, etymology is a tale that is important in providing balance to the whole creature, even despite that other trend I mentioned. And I would argue that digital lexicography and digital text corpora are both optimal when they're integrated with etymological data, or etymological metadata, really. This, in a nutshell, is my argument in my 2019 paper, Syriac Etymology in the Digital Age, published in Studies in Biblical Philology and Lexicography, edited by Daniel King. That a digital platform is the perfect means of joining texts, lexicon, and etymological relationships in a unified system by which one can creatively research the cultural history of a language community. To be sure, etymology is an often abused discipline. Etymology is most dangerous when it is invisible, when conclusions are presented while the processes that lie behind those conclusions are left hidden. And this is just an excerpt from a fairly famous book by James Barr, kind of pointing out that etymology is very easily abused, especially when it's applied to cultural and religious questions. Today, I will be focusing on some ways in which etymological processes can be laid out on screen in order to make them controllable, as well as accessible to a wider public. My own digital etymology project started in 2015 at Brigham Young University, where I was doing editing work for a digital lexicon of Jesse Payne Smith's Compendious Syriac Dictionary, which was being prepared by David Taylor at Oxford University and Christian Heel at Brigham Young University. At that time, given my interest in comparative Egypto-Semitic philology, Christian thought it might be a good idea to add an etymological component to the digital lexicon of CSD, that's the abbreviation for Compendious Syriac Dictionary, which was being encoded in XML-TEI. So I started to work on that. What I had in mind was to provide an end product, something like this. At the top, you can see the entry for the Syriac word for ear as it appears in CSD. Below it are sections for the derivational path, the set of cognates, and references. This project led to an article, but ultimately the idea of adding an etymological component to the digital edition of CSD had to be abandoned because it was too costly in terms of time and resources. The etymological project, along with the extensive data set produced for it, thus became a personal project. With the etymological project no longer tied to a specific printed dictionary, I eventually realized that it might be best to move away from an XML TEI model. XML is great if you have a pre-existing text that you can mark up. However, what I really wanted to do was to be able to generate an entry like this for multiple languages automatically. So I started producing a SQL database accessed through a PHP web app. And as I'm starting to mention the SQL and the PHP, let me also mention that my background is really all in philology, and I'm not a technology expert. I've received a lot of help along the way, and I'm trying to do things kind of learning as I go, but just to be aware of that. So I'm happy to field questions, but be aware of my inability in some areas in that case. So here's a screenshot of the landing page for my database, which I'm calling ALEX, abbreviated Afroasiatic Etymological Lexicon. Since this is a session on front end, I need to point out that this could be interpreted as a really unimpressive HTML interface, by the way, but a more charitable interpretation could be as a brutalist artistic statement. And that's what I really prefer you to think. Currently, this database and the PHP pages are located on my own WAMP server. I want to acknowledge here my gratitude to John Meyerhofer, Director of Information Systems at Himmel, who has helped me to get through several snags in the PHP design along the way. Once I refine the GUI, add admin features, and pump in my data files, I plan to put this on the World Wide Web. Every aspect of this project is still a work in progress. What I want to share with you today are some thoughts regarding what needs to be provided for an optimal user experience in a digital lexicon. In what follows, I will address 4 issues that highlight how some choices made in etymological projects in the past have been one-sided. The power of a digital platform for etymological lexicography is in integrating what have often been treated as opposite choices. First, I want to discuss the question of entry through a language or a family. So one issue is that of the basic format of the database and user app, whether the main entry to the etymological information is through individual languages or through language families. Should the lexicon be structured more like Wolf-Leslau's comparative dictionary of Ge'ez, oriented to a specific language? Or should it be more like Orell and Stolbova's HSED, their Hamido-Semitic etymological dictionary, oriented primarily to the language family as a whole? This relates to the issue of audience. Is it primarily for specialists in Syriac or for Semitists, for example? Optimally, of course, it should be for both. We can visualize this as if the philologists in each area specialty are like birds descending through the branches to get the fruit, while the comparative linguists are like worms that have to crawl up the trunk to reach the fruit. The trunk and the branches represent different search criteria in the digital platform. Therefore, an optimal etymological lexicon in the digital age is not an etymological lexicon of one specific language, showing exclusively that language's relationships to a wider language family, nor is it a lexicon of a proto-language like the Hamido-Semitic etymological dictionary. Rather, it is essentially a lexicon of a language family that can be customized to represent any language in the family or the family as a whole. So here is an image of my Afroasiatic word list table from my database. I should note that some of the columns have been removed so it can fit on the screen. And so in ALEX, this is done by treating proto-languages as nodes on the same level as attested languages. And not all of those proto-languages are used in the same way in other parts of the database. But coding it this way helps to be able, it gives the flexibility to be able to organize it different ways by different users using different search criteria. A second issue relating to the intended audience is the use of transliteration in native script. Most scholars who would use an etymological dictionary can read at least one, but not all, of the relevant scripts. The use of consistent Roman transliteration is essential to accessibility. Some digital lexicons, recognizing the need for accessibility across disciplines, rely heavily on transliteration. This is the case with the Comprehensive Aramaic Lexicon, CAL, with project headquarters at the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, Ohio, USA. CAL uses almost exclusively transliteration in search results and in the headword sections of the individual records, although variants and textual quotations are given in native script. Here are some search results, and here is how the record for the word for ear is displayed in CAL. So there's a headword section at the top, which uses mostly transliteration, and then there are textual citations divided up by the meaning of the word, with all different dialects of Aramaic grouped under each header for a type of definition. And then a section of derivatives, also using almost exclusively transliteration. And then here's another example. This is from George Starostin's Tower of Babel database, and it shows this. So this is really a global etymological database, but it has components for Afroasiatic and Semitic within that. And so this is how one of the entries in the Tower of Babel database would be displayed. And again, it's using all transliteration. So with this precedent, one might wonder, why use native script at all? And to me, there are three main reasons. First, is that an etymological lexicon should be maximally accessible, not only to scholars working across disciplines, but also to speakers of the individual languages. And Adam spoke about this with reference to cuneiform, and what he said is totally accurate in that regard. As far as I agree with him on what he said. But for modern languages that have still a base of native speakers, and especially scholars working within those languages, I think using native script is important where possible. Second, using native script facilitates interaction with digital text corpora in native script. And I'll come back to that a little later. The third reason is basically symbolic. The lexicon should honor the heritage of living communities whose languages are represented. With PHP, it is fairly simple to make native script and transliteration appear consistently side by side, as long as there are table columns in the database for both. Here I show an example of PHP pseudocode to give an idea of how this looks. In Alex, the headword shows both native script and transliteration. So in this example, I want to point out here that other than the section names at the beginnings of the fields, nothing on this page is hard-coded. This is all drawing from SQL database tables. And then down below in the Cognates section, also I'm using native script where possible. I do have an Akkadian entry there relating to Adam's comment about use of cuneiform. Currently, the PHP, at least in the form I'm using it, will not display cuneiform characters correctly, even though they do exist in Unicode. But I don't think it's really necessary for Akkadian to have any native script there. So that it just uses transliteration. Okay. Third issue, etymological path and cognates. The term etymology may refer to two very different presentations of data. Some etymologies show a path of derivation from an original source, which may be either attested or reconstructed, while others show a range of cognates. An example of the first kind of etymology is the etymology of the word expedient in the Oxford English Dictionary online. We can see that the word entered English from French, which in turn got the word from Latin. This etymology traces the word from English backwards to its earliest attested source. Some English dictionaries, like the printed American Heritage College Dictionary, trace words even further back to reconstructed Indo-European roots. The second kind of etymology is seen in many traditional dictionaries of Semitic languages, such as Brown, Driver, and Briggs' Hebrew and English Lexicon, to name just one. The example shown in this slide is from Gabor Takács' Etymological Dictionary of Egyptian. Note here, in particular, the way in which Takács signals the distance of relationships between languages by using vertical lines, 3 to separate the 6 major branches of Afroasiatic, 2 lines to separate larger groupings within those branches, and a single line to separate smaller subgroupings. Here is the record in Alex again. Note how there are 2 sections, one for the derivation path and one for the set of cognates. The first uses a do-while loop in PHP to pull the relevant words from the word list table, one column of which includes an ID that references the parent word on the same table. The second section is currently coded with a separate query for each language, so that the relationships can easily be expressed by the use of the single, double, and triple vertical lines. Fourth issue I wanted to discuss is the representation of interpretive responsibility, which is critical to etymologies being reliable for a wide scholarly user base. This involves the inclusion of bibliographic references for the interpretations that are chosen as standard, as well as the representation of alternative interpretations and the reasons why they are rejected. A great example of this is again, Takács' Etymological Dictionary of Egyptian. In this entry, notice the 2 nota bene excursions at the end. NB, there's an NB1 and an NB2 near the end, at the end of the entry. What Takács has achieved here is remarkable and something not frequently found in lexicons. This allows the reader to see all the steps the author has taken to determine the standard etymology. It also lessens the risk of somebody repeating the past and developing an erroneous alternative etymology because he or she might be otherwise or unaware or lack access to that previous work. An aspect I'm still developing in Alex is a derivations cross-reference table, which will allow each derivational stage to be tagged to mark semantic and phonological changes, and also to supply notes on the plausibility of the derivation, along with a source reference. And this table might eventually, I'm still working on this, this table might eventually replace the derivation path on the word list table that I showed earlier. Anyway, that's still a big question mark on that. I've discussed 4 issues that illustrate the power of digital lexicography to integrate things that might have in the past often been treated as opposing choices. With the front end adaptable to entry both through languages and through families, with native script and transliteration both represented, and with the ability to follow a word's relationship both vertically through its derivations and horizontally through its cousins, one can imagine a digital lexicon as a locus for passing beyond borders of knowledge. With a large enough data set, one could instantly generate a customized lexicon of any Afroasiatic language and move from one language to another in order to view relationships between them. By way of wrapping up, I think it would be appropriate, given the text-focused nature of this conference, to go back to the word record and discuss the field for attestations. Currently, there are just references drawing abbreviations and page ranges from the database. but eventually I'm hoping to hyperlink this to textual corpora. This is where I think the real power of digital etymology could be in the future, blurring the line between etymology and contextual history, or contextual word history, really. Like the other issues I've discussed, context-focused lexicography and etymology have traditionally been perceived as a dichotomy, but I think it, like the others, is really a false dichotomy. I think of etymology as an abbreviated way of denoting the cultural historical narrative of a word, which is embodied in its history of usage over long periods of time. The more detailed narrative is revealed in part through textual corpora. It's only when etymology and digital texts are united that both of them realize their ultimate purpose of approaching the ancient cultures we study. Thank you very much.